38. Good afternoon, everybody. Today is the 38th talk in our series of talks on various aspects of sporting art. We started these talks at the height of the COVID epidemic in 2020, when we couldn't arrange our usual programme of visits. Again, I would like to thank Jamie Rowntree of Rowntree Triangle Gallery for sponsoring these talks. As I've said before, it means that we can continue to put on these talks for free. It also means that non-members, and more importantly, future members, can join us. Again, we are recording this talk for future reference. I would also like to remind you that you can access previous talks through the BSAT website. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Neil Kennedy. I've known Neil for many years. There was always a competitive edge. We both worked in advertising and could almost see each other's offices as we worked across the road from each other in Paddington. I worked in an old British Rail warehouse. Neil worked in a very grand Georgian building. I had the better view. Neil worked his way up from messenger boy to vice president of his agency group in Europe, and he took on many international industry roles, such as president of the International Advertising Association and chairman of the European Advertising Agents Association. His sporting activities involved shooting and sailing. He was Commodore of the Royal Burnham Yacht Club when they challenged for the America's Cup in 1983. More importantly today, he co-authored with Robert Fountain, Lynwood Palmer, Equestrian Artist, Whip and Horseman in 2009. Here's the book. Sally Mitchell, who published the book for Neil, says there are a few copies left. Before we start, I would like to tell you that we are arranging a visit to Burnham to see Neil's collection. We will combine this with a visit to Dedham and the Munnings Museum. No date has been set, but we are working on plans for it to be in May this year. Neil is happy to answer any questions at the end of the talk. All you have to do is type the question under the Q&A tab in the bottom right of your screen. You type the questions and I will put them to Neil at the end of his talk. So, Neil, that's the introduction. Over to you.
Okay. Good afternoon. James Lynwood, spelt with a Y, Palmer, was the third son of the vicar of Lynwood, spelt with an I, in Lincolnshire. His father was the local vicar and later became the dean at Rochester Cathedral. While his siblings trod the conventional middle-class paths into the church and the army, young Lynwood spurned a career in the third worst choice of the law or the diplomatic service, and instead ran away to America aged 17, working variously as a tap dancer in a circus and looking after the Canadian mounted police horses, and as a groom to, believe it or not, the Hackney cab horses outside the Plaza Hotel in New York, at one point owned by somebody called Trump. While sitting outside the stables sketching, Lynwood was spotted by General Field and received his first commission to draw the cover of a US cavalry remount sale catalogue. And this in turn led to some commissions in his late teens with a magazine in America called Rider and Driver. He was totally self-taught, and with any luck, we might see a picture of some of his work in Rider and Driver. And as a result, he managed to attract some wealthy American members of the Belmont Club, some of you may be familiar with famous billionaires of their day, like Isaac Clevier, Marshall Field, the Chicago department store magnate, and Ambrose Clark, who was connected by family with Singer sewing machines. They made the machines, Clark made the thread. And this connection with carriage driving, I'm sorry, we're having some slide problems here. I hope that my team will get it working soon, because if they ask me to do it, it certainly won't work. And this ignited Lynwood Palmer's lifelong passion for carriage driving. He married, in America, a very keen horsewoman called Lydia Frohawk. Sorry, it's the one before the slide. I beg your pardon, I'm wrong. The next one, thank you. Originally, Lydia was from Brisley Hall in Norfolk, but he met her in America with her sister when they were on holiday, I believe, in search of finding suitable husbands. Whether Lynwood Palmer actually met that standard or not, I'm not entirely sure, because he was fairly penniless. He returned to England in 1885, but stopping off in Ireland to stay with his cousin, Asherton Biddulph, who was master of the Ormond Hounds, and he introduced him to some of Lynwood Palmer's first aristocratic patrons. Palmer entered into my life about 45 years ago, when I was widowed, and I later remarried a widow of the Bond Street art dealer Sidney Sabin's nephew. And here is Uncle Sidney. You'll notice, and if anyone ever knew him, he always wore a hunting stock, not as a sort of sartorial affectation, but in fact to hide scars from a throat cancer surgery operation. My dowry to my wife was my 4 young children under 7, and in return I received her 2 equally badly behaved German pointer gun dogs and a collection of very nice Lynwood Palmer paintings, some of which you can see behind me, and many, many cardboard boxes full of photographs and notes which her late husband had gathered in order to start to write the artist's biography. My side of the marriage contract was to promise to one day complete the book which he had started. It took me 29 years. Johanna's Uncle Sidney was a very close friend and sailing pal of my late wife's family, and indeed he was a neighbor as well. And he actually was responsible for introducing us, so it was really a bit of an arranged marriage. Sidney had been Palmer's devoted friend, protege, art dealer, and after he died, his executor. Here is a picture of Sidney in his late teens holding the horse for Lynwood Palmer to paint. The horse was Kirk Calloway, winner of the 1924 Irish St. Leger, which was owned by Lord Granard, who lived in Switzerland. Another of Palmer's early patrons was the notoriously racy Daisy, Countess of Warwick, the past mistress of the Prince of Wales, later become Edward VII, and she encouraged Palmer's interest in carriage driving. I think that she very possibly might have encouraged his interest in 1 or 2 other more indoor pastimes as well. As we see here, he was driving with her around her Eastern Lodge shooting estate near Dunmow in Essex. Palmer had impeccable manners, was always immaculately dressed, And Daisy Warwick was just one of his patrons' wives who took what we might call a bit of a shine to him. Palmer went on to paint for Lord Willoughby de Brooke, the Duke of Portland, whose brood mares he painted, you can see it here, at Bentinck Abbey. He also painted George V's Limelight, which was winner of the Hardwicke Stakes, which, as you can see here, he painted en plein air. Minoru, you can see a sketch for it here, was the very famous and popular Derby winner in 1908, which was racing under the colours of Edward VII. It was in fact not owned by him, it was leased to him by its owner, Colonel Hall Walker. And the horse was named after the Japanese gardener's son at Hall Walker's Irish stud, Tully. And in 1916, Hall Walker donated his bloodstock and his stud at Tully to the nation, which amazingly the British government rejected because they said, we can't be bothered with that, there was a war on, until the Chancellor of the Exchequer ran his slide rule over the value of this horse flesh, and then the government changed their mind. It has at Tully the most wonderful Japanese garden, which there are some pictures of it in the Fothergill book, A Gift to the Nation. In those days, which was really in the dawn of photography, equestrian artists were very often commissioned to paint multiple identical pictures for their patrons, depending on their largesse. So you might have, as well as one for the owner, one for the trainer, perhaps, who was very wealthy, one for the jockey, and if it was a classic winner, one for the Jockey Club or up at Aintree. Lord Derby commissioned Palmer to paint 5 pictures of his 1924 Derby winner, Sansovino, and they are up at Knowsley, and the British Sporting Art Trust has done visits there to see them. There are a rather nice pair of them on either side of a doorway, one looking left and one looking right, which is very often equestrian artists were commissioned to paint, so that they each horse looked into the doorway. A very good example of one of his works is a picture he did of the South African mining and railroad magnate, Sir Abe Bailey. His horse here, Son-in-Law, which you may be able to spot just in the background behind me, it won the 1915 Cesarewitch, and there is an identical duplicate, identical including the frame, hanging in the South African National Gallery in Cape Town, which we have been down to see. And it was quite common for duplicate pictures. During the First World War, Palmer was prevented by his asthma from being enlisted as a soldier. So they put him in charge of the post office stable of 750 horses at Mount Pleasant in London. And of course, all the men the postmen had gone to fight in France. So it was the women who were in fact driving the post coaches around London. And this is the lineup, which I not wish to be unkind, but was not exactly Miss World. During the First World War, he was busy doing that. And then later on, he started his real work, rather like Munnings and others, of being commissioned to paint wealthy patrons, winners. Lord Derby was one of his, and I think that's the next picture. And here is Lord Derby with his stick and his hat and the groom. And he painted quite a few horses for, of course, the aristocracy, but also new money owners were coming onto the scene. I suppose they were what we would call the hedge fund owners of today. But in general, the new riche were often brewers and whiskey distillers like Bass, and here James Buchanan. And the other whiskey baron he painted for was the Johnny Walker family, Colonel Hall Walker. Notably, James Buchanan was a very famous carriage driver as well as a racehorse owner and 2 Derby winners. He later became Lord Woollavington. What is quite amusing, and this is mentioned in the book, is that both Munnings and Lynwood Palmer, who were both painting the same horses very often for the same owners at roughly the same time, had 2 pay rates that they charged. It was 750 guineas if you were old money, but if you were a nouveau riche, it was double, and it was 1,500 guineas. Fortunately, Lord Woollavington and Johnny Walker's family were quite up for that. Money didn't matter very much. The sadness today, well, sadness for me at least, is that although they painted the same horses owned by the same patrons for the same fees, there is a very wide gap between the values some sort of nearly a century later. The highest auction price for a Munnings was in New York at 8.3 million, and the highest auction price for a Lynwood Palmer was somewhere between 80 and 100,000, which was sold by Richard Green. I'm hoping that the book will endeavour to bridge that gap a little. Coronach was one of the Derby winners for Lord Woollavington. And when I was working on the book with Robert Fountain, I went on lots of trips to see his work. And Alistair MacDonald Buchanan, who's the great-great-grandson of Lord Woollavington, has a wonderful collection of equestrian art at Cottesbrooke, his house in Northamptonshire. When I went there to have a look at them and have a talk to him about it, the butler kindly brought in a tray with my tea, and on the saucer was a digestive biscuit, which before I could lean forward to pick up my teacup, Al's Labrador instantly ate, to which he smiled and said, "You'll have to be a bit quicker than that." Lynwood Palmer was also commissioned by Buchanan to paint the distillery's dray horses and his coaching team. We're very lucky that Palmer had photograph albums made of all of his work, which we are lucky enough to own. He did many, many commissions for Colonel Hall Walker, who later became Lord Wavertree. It seems to me that all the beerage got a peerage in those days. In fact, the Walker Gallery now own these, which of course the name will tell you, he founded and funded up in Liverpool. And they have a very good collection of Lynwood Palmer's works, some 12 pictures in all, which are all housed, I'm afraid not in great condition and not very well lit, at Croxteth Park, just outside Aintree. Palmer also painted the winners and the hunters of Lord Rosebery, Lord Lonsdale, called the Yellow Earl. That was named after the Cottesmore's colours, which he was the master of, from Lowther Castle. Tommy Laidlaw, Lord Manton, the Duke of Westminster. We have just across from where I'm sitting one of the Duke of Westminster's racehorses called Burgundy. And I amusingly came across one owned by the Duke of Westminster, but on loan to the Grosvenor Hotel in Chester. I spotted it and suggested to the barman that it might be quite a good idea if he actually moved it away from the spray whenever they changed the lager barrels, which was not doing it the world of good. He painted also for the Marquis of Londonderry, George Lambton. I think I've probably dropped quite enough names by now. As a contemporary of Munnings, they did meet, and rumour hath it that they got together in Munnings' studio in Chelsea, and also went on hunting expeditions and painting expeditions to the West Country, where they painted some landscapes. He painted this pub sign for Fuller's, the brewers, of Master Robert. Master Robert won the Grand National in 1924, and Lynwood Palmer was commissioned by the brewery to do the pub sign. And this is Lynwood Palmer in the top hat on his stagecoach, the Telegraph, which was the Bath stagecoach, actually hanging the sign at the opening ceremony at the Master Robert pub. He lived very close by at the White House at Heston. And when I went into the pub, the same thing happened really as happened in the Grosvenor Hotel in Chester, which is the pub sign, which no longer hangs outside, was propped up in the bar getting spattered in beer. And I did point out that perhaps it might be a good idea to move it somewhere safer. His house, the White House, where he painted and where he kept the Telegraph in his stables, is now, I believe, under the runway at Terminal 5 at Heathrow. Lynwood Palmer did this next picture as a poster for the International Horse Show at Olympia in 1911, but it was rejected by the trustees as being rather too flippant, although I rather like it, and we're lucky enough to own it. But he was commissioned to paint its replacement, and so his replacement was his Telegraph coach, which was a little bit more straightforward. The Telegraph was his passion. This is him driving it. He was really very interested in the traces and the horse and everything about it. He wasn't particularly interested in the backgrounds, and you can see that here. If you were being kind, you would probably say they were Turneresque, but he was only actually interested in every vein and muscle and every part of the horse and its tack. He certainly didn't paint the background in this picture. He did paint the horse, but I suspect the background was painted by one of his assistants, Juliet MacLeod, herself a good equestrian artist, being one of them. What I particularly like about this picture is the I've eaten all the pies groom, who certainly Lynwood Palmer didn't paint. But this background is very different from the background in most of his pictures, and therefore was definitely done by an assistant. There was also something quite interesting about this painting, because I bought it unseen from Christie's and had to bid from my peg at a shoot in Cornwall, where the mobile reception wasn't great. And when I drove back to London the next day to collect it, it was described in the catalogue as being signed by the artist, which it certainly wasn't, because his signature is always diagonal in upper and lower case joined up. And this signature on this picture was in capitals. So that was quite an interesting financial conversation I then had to have with Christie's, where I came out with a successful outcome, at which they came second. Lynwood Palmer never painted people. All of the owners and jockeys in his pictures were painted by his friend Algernon Talmadge, the Royal Academician. You can't really see that, but it was quite a common thing that equestrian artists got somebody else to paint the people. This is a portrait of Stephen Donahue, I think, up. I've slightly lost one. Yes. And that again, the jockey was painted by Talmadge. The next picture is of Lynwood Palmer for the front cover of the book. It's not why it was done, but it was painted on his telegraph coach by Talmadge. And this next to me is that coat. But later in life, it acquired a little bit of an alteration, which anyone who knows about coaching will know that the coachman had leather cuffs on his coat, because driving through all weathers, he would have one hand for the whip, one hand for the reins, and no hands to wipe his dripping nose with. And that's what the leather cuffs were for. His coach, the London to Bath post coach, the Telegraph, he kept at his house, the White House at Heston, where he had his studio. And it was his complete passion. This is his studio at the White House, and that is in fact son-in-law, which he painted for a Bailey. But he used it even in the 1930s as his method of transport to go to lunch at the Arts Club in Dover Street. And here he is driving his coach with some pals for lunch. Pym, the coachman, is postilion at the back, and Potts, sorry, his coachman's name. And as you can see by the queue of traffic behind him, I'm not sure how popular he was on the London streets. He was rumoured to have taken it with a group of friends in the 1936 London to Brighton car rally, which usually took the cars about 9 or 10 hours to do, but took Lynwood Palmer a couple of days because they had an overnight pit stop at a pub in Crawley on the way and a very good dinner. This coat, if you actually put it on, you'd be a lot shorter because it weighs about 2 stone. It really is like wearing a coffin. Coaching was a big passion of his life. This is Lord Woollavington's coach. He did a lot of coaching pictures for him. That's Woollavington's winning park team. And the detail you will see of all of the traces is just 100% pin accurate, all the tensions being just right. Lynwood Palmer owned 2 Cooper Henderson prints. This is one of them. The other one is owned by my sister-in-law. They were a pair. And it was a great accolade, really, for an equestrian artist to hang on his walls a work by another competitive, if you like, equestrian artist, Cooper Henderson, who he greatly admired. Alfred Vanderbilt used to bring his rather smart Brewster coach, and here he is going down Henley Hill, over every year on the ocean liner across the Atlantic to compete in the events, including the International Horse Show. And below decks, Vanderbilt had 110 horses on the ocean liner. And this is Vanderbilt's coach, the Venture, which Lynwood Palmer was commissioned to paint for him. You'll notice he's being led by 2 cock horses as it starts its gallop up Henley Hill. In 1913, Vanderbilt asked Lynwood Palmer to change the outriders' top hats to the velvet caps, as that's what they actually wore. But Palmer, rather unusually, because he was very good at acceding to his clients' demands, refused to do so because he pointed out that only the sovereign's riders wore caps. So he was right. So that put Mr. Vanderbilt firmly in his place, despite his billions. I rather like this next picture, which is rather democratic, of Palmer's stagecoach hailing a donkey cart as it went by. And he did another lovely picture called Good Companions of a donkey and a horse in a field together. And he loved horses and donkeys. This picture is actually in the Museum of London in London Wall, but sadly not on display. Lynwood Palmer died aged 73 in 1941, painting to the end, despite his failing eyesight, primarily because he lived life to the full and consequently was always up to his ears in debt. Nearly 20 years ago, the British Sporting Art Trust co-founder, Dr. Robert Fountain, approached me and suggested that we got together to write a biography and a catalogue raisonné of Lynwood Palmer, who was a painter who Robert felt, and I feel, is less well known and perhaps less well appreciated. And Sally Mitchell wonderfully put this book together for us. The catalogue raisonné ran to over 500 pictures. We think he painted at least 800, but it was probably a lot more because the Munnings students catalogue raisonné is somewhere of the order of 3,000 or 4,000 pictures and sketches. We have some sketches, there are some here is sketchbooks. We've got his address book, which reads like Debrett. There's Lord Derby's the second name down under D, and it really is quite a work. We are very, very fortunate that I think our collection is possibly the largest collection of Lynwood Palmer's work that exists. And we are more than happy and proud to offer art groups, and in particular the British Sporting Art Trust, to come on visits. And Christopher Davenport Jones, as Tim has just mentioned, is planning another one in conjunction with the Munnings Museum up the road at Castle House in Dedham, which is only less than an hour away. And so I look forward, my wife looks forward to welcoming you all here again. I cannot end this talk without paying tribute to those who have helped me in my quest, notably Robert Fountain, Sally Mitchell, the late Patsy McGregor, Sidney Sabin, the Munnings Museum, and Sidney's nephew, my wife's late husband, David Marlowe, and to my wife, Johanna, and of course, to my old Mad Men advertising chum, Tim Cox, who both of us competed to be the greatest legend in our own lunchtime while we were working in advertising. And here we both are, pitched up as part of the British Sporting Art Trust. But I hope you've enjoyed the story of Palmer's life and looking at some of his work. And thank you for helping me keep Lynwood Palmer's remarkable flame ever burning bright. Thank you.
Neil, that was a tour de force. Thank you very much, and much appreciated. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
Good. There are a number of questions that come forth. I think the first is a very detailed question about this. It comes from the point you made about Palmer painting a number of pictures for the owner, the trainer, perhaps the jockey, and the status of those particular paintings. Did he paint them all himself, or did his studio help him in producing those pictures? And there's a particular one that's been referred to, St. Simon. The picture hangs in the Jockey Club, I believe.
Yeah.
Well, I know it does. And there was a picture that came up in 2016 at Doyle's in New York. And Karen Hladek, who lives in America, was considering buying it and was in two minds as to whether it was an original or whether it was done by his studio, and ducked out. I think it went for about $12,500. Do you know what support he did get uh, for the painting of the copies?
Right. As far as I'm aware, he painted all of the pictures, particularly of the horses. He wasn't wealthy enough to have a big studio. He had two apprentices, Juliet MacLeod, and there's another one, his name I have to look up in the book. But they were actually, their fathers paid Palmer to take them on and teach them. So there was not a huge workforce in the sort of Damien Hirst style nowadays of people behind a paintbrush. I think that their main job was A, being taught, and B, doing some of the background work. But as far as I'm aware, I'm not aware of any duplicates being painted by anyone other than Lynwood Palmer himself.
Thank you. Does that mean the value of, can you tell the copy to the,
Sorry, say again?
can you tell the main version of the picture from the copy? Is there any?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen several at Knowsley in particular, although some of them are different constructions. And I the only one I'm really familiar with and have closely examined is Son-in-Law behind me, which we spent a lot of time looking at in Cape Town at the National Gallery, and this one which we own here. And they are absolutely identical and both certainly painted by Palmer.
The second question, thank you for that. The second question was about his collaborators. I was well aware that Talmadge had painted a number of the figures in the paintings. You pick it up in the literature, but it doesn't come across immediately that he was giving credit to his collaborators. Did he recognize the help they were giving him? Was it something they did without recognition?
I have no records to answer that question, Tim, but I suspect that it was either that he subcontracted and paid them to do the faces. It was mainly the faces because he couldn't do likenesses of people, whereas he could of horses. But I can't think of any artist who actually openly acknowledged the input of another artist.
Well, I suppose that's the question. What was the, I suppose, the convention that these artists had?
Yeah. I have no records of any visual or even in the files any attribution to people painting the people.
I think you know that I've got about 150 letters that the correspondence between the Earl of Derby and Lynwood Palmer. I don't know how they came onto the market, but I snapped them up when they did become available. And I wrote an essay for the BSAT on that relationship. The one thing that surprised me, I set out on first reading thinking that the Earl of Derby was a curmudgeon, wanted everything his own way, was dictatorial in the way he treated people, and wasn't satisfied until he got what he wanted. But on going through all the correspondence and dealing with it over the months, I came to the judgment that both Palmer and Derby wanted the same thing. They wanted a perfect horse, and they wanted the horse that they saw. So that I warmed to the Earl of Derby in the end. But there was one story that he went to Paris to paint a horse called Cri de Guerre and came back with the painting. And Lord Derby said it was a very fine painting. Sadly, it wasn't the right horse. He'd painted Cantar rather
Yes.
than Cri de Guerre and had to go back and paint it again. I think without rancor, but it was a mistake that was made. Did you pick up in all your files his relationship with other patrons, how he got on with them? Did he have more of a say in what was happening than he did with the Earl of Derby?
I think that Palmer was well known for being extremely well mannered and polite. And this, of course, most patrons rather liked. And it made, and you picked it up in your essay, Tim, the correspondence, his relationship with, say, Lord Derby was really the same as with any of his patrons, which is they were paying the money. And therefore, if they wanted something changed, and there were one or two examples that you flagged up in the essay about the color of the horse, the tail, the whatever, where whenever a suggestion was made for an amendment, the Palmer would write back and say, of course, no problem, if that's what you want, we'll do it. Whereas, of course, Munnings's reaction was a little bit more forthright.
Robust, I think. It is what it is, and that's where it's staying.
Yeah.
Um, the um, I thought he had a veterinary training or had a specialism in looking after
Yes,
legs.
he didn't have a veterinary training, but because he was such a keen horseman, he took a great interest in a horse's anatomy, and his particular focus was on their hooves. And Lord Derby's trainer at Lambton commissioned him, although I don't think any money was involved, to be the advisor on Lord Derby's stable of racehorses. And in particular, he liked using just instead of pattern plates, even filing down just the hooves and running on that, particularly on the flat. And he was one of his great friends who was on the trustees of the horse show, Richmond Horse Show, was the president of the British Veterinary Association. And these two were great pals. And he used to refer to Lynwood Palmer as Dr. Sorefoot. So I think there was quite a lot of respect by Lambton and Lord Derby and this guy, whose name I've temporarily forgotten, the vet, about Palmer's expertise, particularly on horses' feet.
I think I did pick up that link, but it was the horse's legs that a lot of the correspondence deals with the legs and whether they're being properly portrayed. I think the other thing that when you were showing the pictures, was the highlights on the horse's coat. He seems to have given greater emphasis to that than many other artists. I don't know whether you did great study of that, of the detail in
yes, I think the nearest on the sheen on the coat, it was very important to him. And I think that the nearest equestrian artist who also shared that view was probably Emil Adam.
Was who?
Emil Adam, whose horses were always very shiny.
So what next for the collection? Is it sorry, I'm being buzzed. Kate had disappeared and is now reappearing. The collection, is there more work to be done? Are you still researching?
Yes, I think when you do something like this, you never sort of stop. And I still look at the sale catalogues, and I still go, and indeed I still buy. I probably bought 3 or 4 pictures since COVID. The interesting thing about Lynwood Palmer pictures is that because they had a rather lesser value, that and because there are less of them, very often what happens is the original descendant of the owner dies, and the heir gets grandfather's picture. And if it was a Munnings that was worth 8 million, they might decide to copper up and go on a world cruise. But if it's 10, 50 grand or whatever, they may take the view that this was granddad's horse and we're going to keep it. So I think value relates to the availability on the auction market and in the gallery market of Lynwood Palmer's work. What it really means is that they come on the market less often, and certainly for less money.
Most of the pictures you showed were portraits. Did he, and the driving pictures, did he venture into other subjects? Or?
Yes, he did do some landscapes, usually from the West Country when he was hunting down there on Exmoor, and I've seen those. And Sydney's son actually auctioned 36 of them about 15 years ago at, I think it was Sotheby's. They didn't fetch very much money because I think that Palmer did those pictures almost like someone would in latter days take a camera along while they're going on holiday to record where he'd been and where he'd been hunting, rather than as a work to sell.
Right. Well, Neil, I think we've used up a lot of your time. Thank you very much, both for preparing the talk and being entertaining and knowledgeable about the artist. Because of the work I did and the letters I've got, I've always taken a particular interest in the work. I much appreciated what you've done this afternoon. Just to remind everybody, the book, there are a few copies, I'd say, Neil, that are still available. And if anybody would like a copy, please contact Sally Mitchell at the Museum of the Horse in Tuxford, or Kate, our administrator, and she will make the arrangements for you to get copies. And the second is, as you mentioned, Neil, we're planning a visit both to Burnham-on-Crouch and Dedham, the Munnings Museum, to have a joint venture to see the two collections. Much appreciated. We are planning further talks for later in the year. Sally Bills is in charge of the programme and will be looking to put together a programme for the rest of the year. If anybody's got any ideas as to talks they would like to hear or suggestions of subjects that we should cover, could you please contact Sally, or again contact Kate at the BSAT, and we'll make those arrangements. I thank you, Neil, for your time. It's much appreciated. It's good to see you again, looking so well. It was fun time in advertising. It's even more fun in sporting art. It doesn't have the pressure of clients breathing down our necks, forcing us to meetings that we don't really want to go to. I've enjoyed this afternoon. I much appreciate it, and thank you. And I look forward to seeing everybody else later in the year or on one of the visits that we will be arranging. So thank you, Neil. And for your assistance.
I would like to add my thanks to Helen, and I think it was Paul and Geordie, who've been assisting with the production there with you. They did a fantastic job, and thank you very much. And I'm sorry I disappeared briefly, but my computer crashed. So I'm hoping that the recording will go fine. But thank you very much, Neil. It really has been entertaining. So thank you.
Thank you. And goodbye to everybody. Thank you, Neil.
Bye, bye everyone. How did this? I'll close it. Oh.